Two coworkers, Janet and Miguel, both enrolled in the same high-deductible health plan at their company for over 20 years, and both contributed the maximum allowed amount to their health savings account every single year, roughly $3,000 to $8,300 annually, depending on the year and whether they had family coverage. Janet used her HSA the way almost everyone does. Whenever a medical bill arrived, a doctor's visit, a prescription, an urgent care trip, she paid it directly from the account, keeping the balance low and functional, essentially a specialized checking account for health expenses. Miguel did something almost nobody in his office understood. He paid every medical expense out of pocket, from his regular checking account, and left every dollar in his HSA completely untouched, invested in a simple index fund. For over 2 decades. When Janet and Miguel compared notes approaching retirement, Janet's HSA held $41,000. Miguel's held $312,000. The HSA is frequently described by financial planners as the single most underused account in the entire American tax system, and the reason has nothing to do with contribution limits or eligibility rules. It's that almost nobody understands, or has ever been told clearly, that an HSA carries a triple tax advantage found in no other account available to ordinary workers, and using it the way Janet did, as a pass-through account for immediate medical spending, forfeits nearly the entire benefit that makes it so powerful in the first place. Here's the mechanism most people never hear explained. Contributions to an HSA reduce taxable income the year they're made, identical to a traditional 401k. The money then grows completely tax-free while invested inside the account, identical to a Roth account, and withdrawals for qualified medical expenses, at any point, including decades later, come out completely tax-free as well. No other account available to typical workers combines all 3 of those advantages simultaneously. A traditional 401k gives you the first benefit, but taxes withdrawals in retirement. A Roth IRA gives you the second and third, but not the immediate deduction. The HSA, used correctly, gives you all 3 at once, which is precisely why financial planners who understand it often describe it as a better retirement account than either of those far more commonly discussed options. The catch, and the reason Janet's approach quietly forfeited most of that advantage, is that the tax-free growth only compounds meaningfully if the money is actually left invested rather than withdrawn shortly after it's contributed. Every time Janet paid a $200 doctor's visit directly from her HSA, that $200 stopped compounding immediately, the moment it left the account, rather than continuing to grow tax-free for the next 20 or 30 years. Miguel's approach worked specifically because he paid those same medical expenses from an entirely separate source, his regular checking account, and simply kept every receipt in a folder, understanding a lesser-known rule that HSA funds can be withdrawn tax-free for qualified medical expenses at any point in the future, not just the year they occurred. He wasn't avoiding paying his medical bills, he was choosing which pocket to pay them from, and quietly building a second retirement account with the pocket most people never think to protect. The math behind the $271,000 gap between Janet and Miguel isn't exotic. It's the same compounding principle that shows up in every long-term investing comparison, applied to a pool of money that almost nobody treats as investable in the first place. A modest $3,000 to $4,000 contributed annually, left completely untouched and invested at a 7% average return for over 20 years, grows into a substantial sum almost entirely because it was never interrupted. Janet's contributions, spent down almost as quickly as they arrived, never had the chance to compound at all, functioning closer to a specialized cash account than an investment account, despite technically being the exact same type of HSA Miguel had. This strategy does require a specific financial cushion to work properly, and it isn't accessible to everyone in exactly the same way. Paying medical expenses out of pocket rather than from the HSA requires having that money available elsewhere, in a regular checking or savings account, which assumes a household isn't so financially stretched that every medical bill needs to be paid from whatever account is most convenient at the time. For households in that position, using the HSA the way Janet did, as a straightforward way to pay for medical costs with pre-tax dollars, is still a meaningfully good outcome. It simply isn't the maximum outcome available. There's an additional detail that makes Miguel's approach even more powerful than it initially appears. Because qualified medical expenses can be reimbursed from an HSA at any point in the future, not just the year they were incurred, Miguel's folder of 2 decades of medical receipts functions as a standing option he may never even need to use. If he never withdraws money to reimburse those old expenses, the HSA simply continues functioning as tax-free retirement money for any future medical costs, which, particularly later in life, tend to be substantial. And if he ever does need extra cash, he can withdraw an amount matching those 2 decades of saved receipts, completely tax-free, at any time he chooses. The households who build meaningful wealth inside an HSA aren't doing anything complicated or requiring specialized financial knowledge most people lack access to. They're simply treating the account as what it actually is, a long-term investment vehicle with uniquely favorable tax treatment, rather than what it resembles on the surface, a convenient way to pay medical bills. The account itself doesn't announce which version you're using. Janet and Miguel had, technically, identical accounts, identical contribution limits, and identical investment options available to them the entire time. The only difference was which account they instinctively reached for when a medical bill showed up, a decision made without much thought twice a year that quietly determined a $250,000 gap by the time either of them looked closely enough to notice. The lesson is not that everyone should copy Miguel's strategy exactly. The lesson is understanding what tools you have available and using them intentionally. Small financial decisions repeated over decades create enormous differences.